It's good to have you with us this evening. This is the 7th year that we've held a public information hearing on our budget as we develop our budget each year. This year we're right in the middle of developing our fiscal year 2017 budget. Staff has actually been involved in this for much longer. It's nearly probably a 9-month effort, maybe even a 12-month effort. Once we complete one, we're in the process of moving ahead with another. And once we adopt a budget, there's a continual process of reevaluating circumstances, and things can change along the way. But as you know, any business needs to have a budget on which they base their planning and their spending for the ensuing year, and that's what we're doing. We are appreciative of the fact that we have 3 of our city councilors here this evening. I don't see Councilor Duckett, so just glancing around the room, I haven't seen him walk in. He may be here a little later. We do have Councilor Rogers, Linda Rogers, who represents District 1, who is here, Sean Shara, who represents District 2, and Gayla McCulloch, who represents District 3. And so we just finished an all-day session yesterday in which we got our introduction to the proposed 2017 fiscal year budget, and then also had about a 3.5-hour strategic planning session during which we took a look at 15 to 20 different significant projects that we're either working on or that we are looking at beginning to work on for our community. I would refer to those as kind of the quality of life projects that every community is always considering and taking a look at. So we had a long day yesterday, but we were introduced to the budget. This evening, Mr. Mays, our city manager, is going to be introducing you to this budget, but it's actually much more involved than just looking at some of the details of the proposed budget. It's actually giving you somewhat of a historical context about how we develop our budget. What are the factors that go into developing this budget? You're going to learn a lot, I think, and I hope tonight. This is my 7th year to be involved in this particular public hearing, this format, and each year it refreshes my memory, and it's a good refresher course for me. Those of you who have been here before, and I know many of you have, will have learned something. We've had very positive comments about this public budget hearing process. People going away feeling that they have learned a little bit more about their government. One of the things that I use as an example is that in the city of Farmington, we now have a gross receipts tax that's at 7.625%. Most people think that when they pay that 7.625% gross receipts tax on every purchase of a good or service in our community, that the city of Farmington takes that 7.625%, and it goes into our revenue stream. What we learn, if you don't already know, is that only a portion of that 7.625% goes to the city of Farmington, only about a third of it. A portion of it goes to the county government, and the remainder of it, the largest portion of it, goes to the state of New Mexico. And so it's in that context, I think that you'll learn a lot of facts of that magnitude that will help you be ambassadors for us as you go out into your areas of influence in our community. Before we ask Rob to begin with a presentation, I want to make some other introductions. So if you're on the staff at the City of Farmington, would you please stand up? All right, and I'd like to really briefly just go around the room, introduce yourself by name and your position with the city. And let's start over here, Eddie.
My name is Edward Smiley. I'm the General Services Director.
Ryan Smiley, City Clerk.
Rodney Romero, the IT Electric Utility Director.
Julie Baird, Assistant City Manager.
Flo Trujillo, Youth Services Coordinator at the Farmington Public Library.
Karen McPeters, Library Director.
Aaron Boggs, Library IT.
Hello everyone, I'm Ira Newman from the Farmington Indian Center.
I'm Christy Benson with the Purchasing Department.
David Burke with Fire Department.
Terry Page, Fire Department.
Tom Swank, Human Resources Director.
Ryan Briggs, City Safety and Security Officer.
Julie Wagner, HR, Benefits and Compensation.
David Cipher, Public Works Director.
Mary Bolton,
Community Development Director.
Shana Reeves, Director of Communication and Quality Performance.
Mike Lewis, Airport Manager.
Andy Mason, Administrative Services Director.
Teresa Emmerich, Budget Officer.
And Corey, would you introduce yourself?
Corey Starr, Director of Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Affairs.
Thank you all, and thank you for being here. We just want to introduce these people to you. Some of them will be familiar faces to you, but we also want to demonstrate that we have the people here this evening who can answer questions and respond to comments if that's necessary. Our format this evening will include about a 45-minute presentation by our city manager, Rob Mays, and then we will open it up for questions and comments. It doesn't have to be a question. If you just want to make an observation or a comment, that's good too. But we're actually looking for feedback from community members who are here. We are interested in what people think. If you think that we're offering a service or a program that you think we should not be offering, that helps us think about those kinds of issues. If you think that we should be offering something that we don't currently offer, that also is helpful to us because we're in the stage of this process where we can make some changes. And we're interested in hearing what our citizens have to think. Now, there are other forums for getting back to us. Certainly, social media, you can offer comments if you'd like to do it that way. Each of us who are elected representatives have emails. You can communicate with us that way or call us. We're all very accessible, I think, in that way. So thank you again for being here. And we'll go ahead and start the presentation. This is City Manager Rob Mays.
Thank you, Mayor, and I also want to thank you all for being here and taking time to become educated on the city finances. I'm going to be kind of at an angle here because I'm going to be referring to the screen with the laser pointer, so I'm going to get a little better angle to do that with you. This is actually my 10th budget process, and I think maybe with the exception of 1 year, each budget season and process has gotten harder and more difficult and more complex all along the way. And this year probably the most complex of all in terms of challenges that we face, in terms of the sense of how volatile things are right now. Really at the end of the day, we have to have a balanced budget, which means we have to live within our means. So really an effective plan for finances starts with how predictable or how good are we at predicting what our recurring revenues will be, primarily from our tax base, and then matching up our expenses and being sure that we can fund our services that are necessary. Our crystal ball is never too effective, but this year it's particularly fuzzy because things are so dynamic. We're not at a place right now where revenue is in a solid trend. It's in the downward trend, and so that makes it very difficult to know where will that trend go, how long will it be sustained, and how to plan accordingly. But as the mayor said, in one sense, there's nothing really magic about a new fiscal budget. That's just the point in time that based on state statute, we have to reset and submit to the state a new budget. We manage the budget every day, every week, every month, every quarter, and can make adjustments along the way. And we frankly expect that this budget may have some adjustments to it. We've planned contingencies into our financial plan. From a philosophical basis, what we're trying to do is to strike a balance. The last 8 years, when we've had such difficult financial times, we've tried to operate on a principle that to overreact and cut more services than necessary prematurely is just as bad as underreacting and putting ourselves into financial crisis by overextending ourselves, because we are a service organization and there are consequences to us cutting our services. And in fact, the more difficult things are out there financially, the more difficult things are out in the private sector from an employment basis. In some cases, there are more demands that are placed on city government and the services that we provide. On the negative side, unfortunately, law enforcement, crime goes up. But on the positive side, the quality of life services that we provide and that taxpayer money heavily subsidizes, those become more important at a time when maybe people can't afford the family vacations that they plan and they're staying home and spending days in our park system or in our library or the other quality of life that we offer. So we're not like an oil and gas business where If you have to bring a rig into the yard, you lay off the associated crew that worked that rig. In our case, the services have to go on, and the demands of the public continues or actually increases. So we'll be monitoring things closely and exercising our due diligence all through the process. There are some, for those of you that have been through this presentation before, the numbers, of course, are always different, but we've had some key slides that the mayor talked about. We talk about our taxes and where they come from and where they go. That's all still in here, but we've added some new elements regarding kind of the big picture of our economic region and how we're currently faring that I think you'll find interesting. So I'm going to start by talking somewhat about the kind of the regional economy, then talk about our current financial status, and then really drill down into our budget process itself, where this budget stands, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So when we talk about Farmington, this is what makes Farmington so unique. Article in the paper this week from a prominent developer out of Albuquerque that's developing the Dick's Sporting Goods and Chick-fil-A and Five Guys and Mattress something and Sleep Number and another place, made a comment that's very true. This area is the regional economic hub for 8 or more relatively large communities, and that's what this is about. You hear people talk about our trade area. Our trade area is defined as this area in this dark circle right here. This is our trade area. It includes all of San Juan County, and its population is about 220,000 people. Then in reality, there's a footnote on our data, is that because of the uniqueness of how we are isolated up here, our formal trade area actually expands with a footnote all the way out into the Four Corners region with an estimated population of 307,000. That's why nothing about the city of Farmington fits benchmarks. Someone might say, you know, what kind of a library do you need? How many police officers do you need? How many, parks do you need? We don't fit the benchmarking of normal cities from a budget standpoint, size of employees. In addition to that, we have the Farmington Electric Utility that offers the electric utility for all of San Juan County. So making us a very large government organization. But we have to be staffed for police and public infrastructure and quality of life for an influx of population that's estimated around 100,000 people on weekends, that are different 100,000 people that are drawing from this population of 307,000. Would a town of 45,000 have a Walmart? Probably. Would it have a Sam's Club? No. Would it have a mall like we have? No. Would it have 2 super Walmarts, which at one time both were record-breaking stores? Of course not. So on, the kinds of amenities and retail establishments we have are really based on these kinds of numbers, not the 45,000 that our city pop. That number is almost irrelevant to any of our planning and really any of our benchmarking as an organization. And then narrowing it down a little bit more, you've been hearing a lot about the MSA. We get real sensitive when the MSA is talked about. It's a two-edged sword. The MSA is all of San Juan County, Farmington Metropolitan Statistical Area. It's named after Farmington because we're the largest population center in that. So when you read in the paper, like the infamous story from a week or so ago, Farmington is the fastest shrinking city in America. That was not a correct statement. Farmington MSA, by percentage, was the fastest shrinking population, but that's all of it. Farmington is not the fastest shrinking city in our own MSA, and certainly it's not the fastest shrinking even in our state, but it's only one of 4 MSAs. There are 4 MSAs in our state: Albuquerque, Farmington, Las Cruces, and Santa Fe. We're one of 4. These are federal designations. So when you read articles, the most trailer parks, you read articles about health, crime, domestic violence. There was one, there's a lot of them on literacy. Some of these negative things that you see headlines, they are almost always talking about the Farmington MSA when everything is thrown in the pot together. That includes all of the small incorporated cities, all the way down to Newcomb, all the way up to the border. Includes all of the unincorporated areas of San Juan County, and it includes parts of the Navajo Nation. All that is thrown in together, and those stats get reported. So many of those stats that sound negative are not representative of the city of Farmington or the quality of life that we enjoy here. So one of the reasons why this is so important, we've got to maintain wonderful quality of life parks. Let's go ahead and go through those, Teresa. Recreation facilities, and then stop on this one. Because it is part of maintaining our identity and our place as the regional hub. The reason our economy has done as well as it's done, in spite of the oil and gas industry, and I'm going to talk more about economic diversification and what we've accomplished in a minute, but these things are economic based for us in a unique way, because by definition, you've got outside money coming in to our area. So when we get a new retail establishment or something, or when we invest in a park, or one of the things the City Council is looking at right now is a family water park. Those aren't just, in our case, nice things. They are absolutely necessary for us to make sure we maintain our place as the economic hub. So when you think about, no, I'm not ready yet. So when you talk about this pie, I hear people say all the time, how many more hamburgers places can we have here? Well, I get it, but there's two ways to look at this. We have got to grow the pie bigger, but we also need to grow the pie in quality and in depth. So let me illustrate that in order to maintain our place as the commercial hub of this entire region. So you say, how many hamburger places does a commercial hub of 300,000 need? Well, think about the hamburger. Size, we want to sell more hamburgers. Depth, we want to have more options where people can buy hamburgers. And then quality, we want to have the best hamburgers. All three of those are a way of measuring and identifying and understanding the pie. We want the pie to get bigger, but each piece of the pie might get smaller. But as long as the pie is growing in quality, in size, and depth, that's healthy for our overall economy. All right, Teresa, now we'll jump into the 39-year history. So where have we been? And this is important backdrop for some slides in a minute to see our history here. So here's our 39-year GRT history. The infamous 80s, 1986 to 89. We had a similar downturn in the oil and gas industry that we saw in 2010. We lost about 19% of our revenue. At one point in 2010, we were down as much as 22%. Other than that, and this here is actually thought to be the state had a computer change, and that's actually thought to be, and that's probably more level, that there was a timing issue in when the state reported the income to us. So probably pretty much with the exception of the 80s, all the way up to 2010, this community enjoyed unprecedented exponential growth in tax revenue. In some cases, double-digit growth year over year. Starting in 2010, we dropped 17% on a year-to-date basis, and at one point as much as 22%. But what's interesting to me, the new world versus the old world. Down here, within about 18 months, the city had recovered to where it was, and then here's that slope up, the dip down, 18 to 24 months later, back on the ride up the hill. Here, we've dropped, and we still are not even close, 8 years later, to recovering to 2010. The next slide will really illustrate that in a pointed way. So here's a snapshot of those lines. Here's 2009. This was the high point of the city's revenue in all history of the city of Farmington, was right here. The blue line represents, so here's a level baseline coming out to today to mark the top of the mountain for us. We dropped that 17.5% in 2010, kind of wound our way back up, started to feel pretty good about things in 2014, that maybe we were going to be on a little mini oil boom from the Mecca shale. Found ourselves 2 years in a row moving up here, hit this point at the end of 2015, And at this point right here, we were still 5.1% right here below 2009. So we never had recovered as compared to what happened in the 80s. Now, march forward to where we're projecting this year, we have dropped down to about 9%. So we climbed back up and rolled back off the hill again. We're back down another 4%, leaving us today, as we project the end of this fiscal year, 9% less GRT tax revenue than we had in 2009. In the meantime, the red line represents inflation. We have less dollars to spend, and each dollar has about 12% less spending power. So 9% less dollars, each dollar will buy 12% less. That's a negative variance of over 19%. So in a very real way, today, your city government is operating on 19% less GRT tax revenue in the form of buying power and actual dollars than we had in 2009. So just think about that and how that would affect your lifestyle in your own home. And some of you may have experienced something similar. Yet we have managed to hold things together, actually advance the city of Farmington during this time, and still are fiscally sound. That gives you just a picture kind of what we're up against in the economy, as well as a picture of the kind of management financially, the people that the mayor introduced around this room earlier, and how serious we take stewardship of taxpayer dollars. We couldn't sustain those kinds of a reality as if we weren't serious about that. So let's move this net gross receipts tax by sector. Now this chart you're not going to be able to see, but I'm just going to make a point here about this. What this chart is doing is comparing our GRT sectors. Our GRT comes in retail, healthcare, miscellaneous services, oil and gas, wholesale trade, construction, other, and then a total of all of them at the end. And this is an interesting analysis that I did actually for a talk that I gave, a lecture at Duke University last fall, that they wanted to know what's going on in the San Juan Basin. And it compares, the first number it compares is when we fell in 2010, down when we fell off the mountain during the crisis, the global recession. Then it compares the recovery in between, where we climb back up to the 5, and then it actually, we can look at where we are today. So that's just there to kind of tell. I'm going to give you some data that we kind of extrapolate from this chart. In looking at oil and gas specifically, which is actually this section, we dropped 29% in oil and gas in between 2009 and 2010. But it continued to drop during the somewhat recovery that we looked at between 10 and 15. It dropped another 36%. And today, as we stand here, from the closing of 2015 until 9 months into this fiscal year, it's dropped another 26%. Oil and gas has virtually disappeared in a big picture as a revenue source for the city of Farmington right now. But what the other sectors have done is what's so amazing. During that recovery period, slight recovery between the fall of 2010, when I say fall now, I mean the fall, the crash, the moderate improvement to get back up to within 5%. Retail actually, during that same period of time, went up 1.5%. The miscellaneous service sector went up 35%. Wholesale up 15%. Construction 13%. Other 57%. And everything combined 15%. So while gas fell another 36% after the fall of 2009, everything else was up except oil and gas. That's as we closed 2015. So back in 2010, this is what's really interesting to me. When we had the big crash of 2010, for every dollar we lost in oil and gas revenue, we lost 50 cents in all the others combined. A huge correlation, right? I mean, that's a huge correlation. You lose $1 in the oil and gas sector, everything else plummeted at a 50% of that level. Fast forward to the recovery, the somewhat recovery of 2015, for every dollar that we were still down in oil and gas, we were only down 7 cents in the composite of everything else. That's an incredible decoupling of the ratio of our dependence on oil and gas. Now you say, yeah, but the last 9 months, I bet everything's fallen apart. Well, it has in oil and gas. Oil and gas, as I told you a minute ago, in the last 9 months has plummeted another 26%. But the total GRT, all of it together, is only down 5%. Now, I can't believe I'm saying the words only down 5%, but that's survivable as a community. And what's driving that? In the last 9 months, retail is only down 3%. Food and accommodations, tourism is a real high point, is up 5% in the last 9 months. Healthcare is up 7% in the last 9 months. Construction is up 10%. So we are still certainly, the oil and gas industry is very, very important to us, and how long these ratios will stay and how long they're sustainable, but it takes you back to why acknowledging and respecting the retail and the service sector and tourism and these other sectors is important as a community, and that as a local government that we enhance and that we nurture those other sectors through quality of life projects. We can't just roll up the carpet because the oil and gas industry is in trouble. We've got to continue to maintain ourselves as the clear retail, commercial, service, healthcare, quality of life, recreation, entertainment hub of that 307,000 region. That's what you have to visualize. So if you hear the City Council talking about building a spectacular family water park at a time of the economy being down, understand that that's economic development for this community. That continues to bring in tourism and bring in regional tourism, as well as continue to solidify that Farmington is the place you want to come from all over the Four Corners region. Come down, go shopping, go to a movie, go to the water park, check into a hotel, spend the night, and get up and do it all over again. Go to Sam's Club, load up the back of your pickup truck, and then go back home out into the Four Corners region. So it's incredible. It's incredibly important that we see ourselves as more than an oil and gas community. That we see ourselves as something much, much broader than that and recognize our economy. Let's skip the next one for the sake of time. But economic diversification. We get asked a lot of questions about this, and the mayor can testify. That might be the number one question he gets. What is the City of Farmington's role in economic development? Well, it's primarily what I just talked about. It's recognizing that as a government we need to provide the infrastructure, the quality of life, the public safety, the parks, the libraries, the amenities, the infrastructure, the utilities, in order to nurture our key role as the hub of the entire Four Corners region. That's the most important thing the City of Farmington does. We don't invest in restaurants, right? People say, why did they put in another hamburger place? I didn't put in another hamburger place, I assure you. I get credit sometimes for that when I had nothing to do with it. I likewise get blamed when I had nothing to do with it. The private sector develops. The private sector invests. The private sector risks its capital and decides how we're going to grow and develop. They're the ones that take the risk. But nevertheless, we're interested in economic development, and the City of Farmington, here's how we do it. Instead of us having a staff of 2 or 3 people in the city and having our own economic development department, the economic arm of the City of Farmington is the Four Corners Economic Development Incorporated. And this is where we partner together with the private sector because, once again, it's ultimately a private sector venture. So this allows us to partner with the private sector as well as the other government entities. The City of Farmington is by far the largest single contributor. I think we're double maybe more than double, the very next highest single contributor to Four Corners Economic Development. We take it seriously. Your mayor, your city council take it seriously, and we invest heavily. And it's a very organized and strategic approach. And they have targeted sectors to try to develop jobs. And notice, hamburgers is not on that list. Because you really don't target hamburgers or retail. It just comes. And it's tied to all these things. But in our case, it's tied to some very unique factors of our regional impact. Agricultural, energy, and mining, that includes oil and gas. Very, very important, not giving up on it. Tourism, education, health services, location neutral. So I wanted you to know, if you want more information, go to their website. This organization, unfortunately, the last couple of years has been spending more time on defense than on offense, but it has had some real success in organizing our efforts to fight the EPA and to stand up for the oil and gas industry through the Real People, Real Jobs campaign has been very, very successful, and I encourage you to monitor that. So the summary kind of this opening part is, we need to work intentionally to create a vision and strategies for economic development and diversification, but don't underestimate or underappreciate retail and services for us. That is, in many ways, the economic base. Now, I'm not saying that a job at Freddy's is the equivalent of a lost job at the power plant. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that we've got to respect the whole big picture and how, as a local government, we play into it. Okay? All right. Budget process. Don't worry, Mr. Mayor. But you took 10 minutes of my time. I want you to know. I marked it. So we'll see how this goes. Our budget process, the mayor already alluded to this. It's practically a 12-month process. We finish one and we get a little bit of take our breath, and we're back working at it. March to January, our city staff and department heads and budget team are really starting to put together numbers. Now think about this, since our fiscal year does not start until July 1, when we are initially planning the budget, we're looking at an 18-month planning window. So think about how volatile things have been. We have literally been changing this budget weekly since we started, and probably will continue until we find somewhere we settle in. April, we begin the process with the City Council, work on the utility budgets primarily and the capital improvement plan. Then we get right where this is right where we are right now. This happened yesterday. This is happening today. And actually, this actually happened here. According to state statute, then we work on this budget, and then I'm required as the city manager to submit a budget to the City Council. And it has to be my best judgment and fiscal responsibility to present to them a budget that I think balances those things that I just talked about, not overreacting with underreacting. Then the council mulls it over for the month of May, and then ultimately adopts a final budget that we submit to the state. Okay. Here's our budget in a nutshell. In this respect, it was easy this year because it's flat. So, revenue budget, this is total revenue now, not just GRT, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. So, GRT is down, but some of the other revenues have remained solid. And as you know, the City Council was forced to put in a new tax effective January 1st to make up for the hold harmless. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. All these numbers are inclusive of the new tax. So all the bad numbers I'm going to show you, they've already eaten up the new tax, so to speak. There's no relief really from it. But we would be in absolute crisis if the council had not put in that tax in January. I mean, we would be cutting $4 to $7 million from this budget, which, trust me when I tell you, would desecrate our services. It would literally mean police officers, a fire station, several parks closed, cutting the library probably in half. I mean, on and on. It's things we don't want to do as a community. And I spent all that time at the front half of this trying to illustrate why we can't let our quality of life fall apart, because it would have an exponential domino effect on us. If this was no longer a place people wanted to come and shop, we would see everything exponentially drop out and be in a true death cycle. The reason we're not in a death cycle is because we are more diversified as an economy than probably we generally give ourselves credit for. So revenues staying the same, total expenditures staying the same, actually cutting them a little bit. So this represents, again, the budget that I proposed to the council yesterday. Now, from a GRT standpoint only, which is one portion of our revenue, we're actually building a budget around a very conservative projection that GRT will be 10% below what we budgeted for in 16. So on a budget basis, so give ourselves that. We've got to get under it, position ourselves to try to recover. So this is going to be a very, very lean year. Our employees are not getting any raise whatsoever, but most of our employees totally recognize and understand what the private sector is going through and are grateful for their jobs and remain dedicated to serving our public and serve our way through this crisis. But our employees contribute directly to tax revenue creation by providing the services that we provide, the safe environment, the public utilities that work so that this place can stay economically diverse through our retail and commercial service hub. This is a status of where we are just in 9 months into the year financially. Total revenue, again, counting the new tax. The new tax at this point would have been in place for 1 month, and it wasn't budgeted. So that's all extra money in terms of relating it to being on budget. So we're actually over budget in GRT, or total revenue, but that's because the new tax is in there, and expenditures are under budget. So we're living with our means, we're managing ourselves well, continue to position ourselves to be able to weather the storm as best as it can possibly be weathered and minimizing the impact on our citizens. So kind of the big picture, back to when you visualize that picture of the size of Farmington and what we are as the hub and as the electric utility for the entire county, gives you an idea. This is the size of Farmington's government. We are the 4th largest municipal government in the state of New Mexico. Your mayor and city council lead the 4th largest city as far as government, municipal government in the state of New Mexico. We're 4th. Drops off pretty quick. Hobbs, we hate them, by the way. They fell further than us, but they're already starting to recover. So I really don't like the city manager. I do. I like him a lot. You know I'm kidding. But you get an idea of how it drops down. Put that in some perspective of the other regional governments. San Juan County, their total budget's about $130 million. So City of Farmington's roughly twice the size of the San Juan County government. San Juan College, we're roughly 3 times the size of San Juan College. Farmington Municipal Schools, City of Farmington's roughly 2 times the size of Farmington Schools. And then just for comparison point, Aztec and Bloomfield, Aztec's budget's about $37 million, Bloomfield's about $16 million. So we are by far the largest government agency in this region, by far, and we are the 4th largest municipal government in the entire state of New Mexico, one of the 4 MSAs. So again, keeping the perspective of nothing about, when you think about the city of Farmington, nothing matches the benchmark of our 45,000 population. Nothing. At any level or stage. Okay, so let's go to the total budget. So that $270 million budget, where does it go? How's it broken down? We're going to focus most of our time in these 3 green up here. These are the tax-supported parts of our budget. That most of the services that you think of as traditional government services are coming out of the general fund or a sub-component of the GRT funds in these green. That's the general fund, the streets, and the parks department. All these others are either enterprise funds or special funds that are separate. You know, lodger's tax, where we run all the lodger's tax through. The electric utility, it's about $110 million of the $270 million. Water, utilities, and so that's how it breaks down. So we're going to focus here, so of the $271 million budget, we're going to focus on these 3 moving forward now. So here's what those look like. General fund, these are the tax-supported. Here's where the money comes from. The blue, which you can't read the numbers, the blue part of the pie is the largest. That's gross receipts taxes. So we live heavily on what happens out there in the cash registers. Our biggest threat, other than the oil and gas industry right now, our biggest threat, bar none, is internet sales. It's not just an emotional shop local plea. I'm telling you that it is the greatest threat to municipal governments in the state of New Mexico. Our tax structure is so broken in this state that it is designed in a way that it's not possible to capture any revenue out of internet sales. The entire system is going to have to be overhauled, and every single year we're seeing 20% increases nationally in internet sales. So I tell my employees, shop local as if your job depended on it, because it does, and I tell our citizens, shop locally as if every service that you've come to depend on and count on and take for granted shop as if those services dependent on it, because they do. This is something that will reach an absolute crisis place in our state within a couple of years. It's exasperated, obviously, by oil and gas being down. Finally, the state's starting to pay attention to it because they're hurting. And they're going, wow, what's happening? Because they've been living off the oil and gas, fat on the hog, so then they don't really care that much about GRT. We live on GRT, period. Even during the great oil and gas times, we live on GRT. Counties are a little more diversified. So you see then the rest of them, property tax is a little tiny sliver. The rest of these are everything from grants. Our dividend from the Farmington Electric Utility is in here. It's not all that, but you see we live on GRT. So things that threaten GRT threaten our very basic existence as a government. And there's nothing we can do about that. We're at the mercy of our state legislature, and they've got to get dialed in. They've got to get focused on the things that they're doing in Santa Fe and how they affect local government where people really live. You don't really know, all you know about the federal government is you really don't like them. All you really know about the state government is you don't really like it, but you like our local representatives probably. And beyond that, you don't really pay attention to the state because 99% of what you rely on comes from the city of Farmington. Those are the services that you use every day. So that's where the revenue comes from. Let's go to how we spend it. So here's how we spend it. Police, fire, municipal court, so kind of the three big public safety, accounts for about 40% of our budget. So the chief is here now, and he was at another engagement, but our two chiefs, they keep us safe, but we pay dearly for it. But it's worth every penny because if we haven't got a safe community, it's not a place people want to be. Public works, we've got to have our infrastructure, got to have utilities. And this is Parks and Rec. This is what's probably most extraordinary about this community. Other than public safety, we spend nearly 20% of our entire budget, our entire general fund budget, on parks, recs, and cultural affairs. Healthy investment in library, obviously, but the rest are small little departments primarily related to things like IT, legal, and those kinds of things. So most people find that somewhat interesting, kind of where the money goes. This is a tax history. I told you last year the city council had to put in a tax in 2015, a 0.25%. It had been since 1998 since the city of Farmington had raised taxes. Everybody else around us has raised taxes, but we hadn't since 1998. But every time somebody else raises taxes, everybody thinks it's us. County raised taxes 4 times since 2003, these here, and the state raised them twice. But this is the one I want to focus on for a minute, because this is related to this issue called hold harmless. The second biggest threat to the Farmington as a government and to your services are something that your state legislature already did to you, and where they are systematically taking about 11% of our tax revenue. So in the midst of our down economy, where we haven't even recovered from 2009, our state came in and zapped 11% of our revenue and said, but it's not that bad because we're going to phase it out over 15 years. I'm going to show you what that phase out is $45 million in the first 15 years alone, and then it doubles every 5 after that. So we had to, and that act by the state caused cities all over the state have had to raise taxes now. The reason it's so insidious what they did is in 2005, the state made the decision to take tax off of food and medicine. The tax base is what we live on. The idea is to have a low tax rate on a broad tax base, and every single time they take something out of the tax base, it forces taxes to be raised on everything else. Over half of the tax base has been exempted now by the state legislature, causing the tax rate to be double what it would need to be. We could have a 2 or 3% tax rate in this community, in this state, if we had everything back in the tax base. But when they took food and medicine out, they really killed us because, remember what I said about the internet? People are buying everything on the internet now, but mostly are still buying food and medicine at home. So there's a double attack on us when they made food and medicine tax-free. And they didn't even help the poor. The poor don't pay tax on food, the poorest of the poor, or on medicine. But they do pay tax on their tennis shoes, their school supplies for their kids, their diapers. So you exempted something that they already don't pay tax on and made the tax go up on all the things they still have to buy. So it didn't even help the poor. But they immediately, when they took tax off food and medicine, raised it 0.5% on everything else. And that was to fund what's called hold harmless. So they knew we couldn't live without our taxes from food and medicine. So they raised taxes on everything else and said, we'll keep paying you, local governments, just as if we were collecting the tax on food and medicine. Raised taxes and everything else. Fast forward to 2015, they decided to stop paying us the hold harmless, but they kept the 0.5%, which is an effective tax increase by the state, and then forced us to have to raise it on top of it in order to maintain our tax levels. So it's a bad deal. Here's how bad it is. As bad as everything I just told you was, just cut that right out of it. That's what the state did, transferred over to their general fund, to their financial coffers. That's what they've done to us. They are phasing it in, but the way it works, it's a multiplying effect that the next chart shows. So it's phased in over these first 15 years, right to about here. Starts relatively small. What's $400,000? That's the first year. Next year they took 700. Next year they'll take 1.1, 1.5. The cumulative effect, even by right now this year alone, they're taking 1.1 million from us. That's money that would be funding our local services. Instead is gone. Next year it'll be up to 2.1. By the time you get to the 15 years, it's at $43 million. By the time you get to 20 years, it's at 71. And then every year after that, they just keep taking 5 million more, 5 million more. So that's back to the pie, to the JRT cutout. That's what that means. Nope, right there. So that's what your local government and your elected officials have to deal with one way or another. And that's why they put in either cut 11% of our services or put that tax in. The problem now is that tax is diminishing. So we're living on it now to keep our services going. And we can't live on it because the state's coming back for what percent a year? 6% more each year, right? Every year they're going to eat that down. So it goes away. It's the 2/8 that we put in is not enough to replace what they're taking from us. So it is inevitable that eventually the 3/8 has to be put in, and that's just to make up. So our city will have 3/8 of taxes ultimately put on top of it without one single new penny generated to do anything for our local economy and our local citizens. That's the policy of our state legislature. Last January, they decided they weren't going to phase it out anymore. They were just going to take it all at one time. Very thankfully, every one of our local representatives banded together to fight that. So them coming after more, our group were very instrumental in fighting off. Hopefully, but as the state's woes continue, what are they going to do? If they're going to stick to this policy of pretending that they haven't raised taxes, when they raised it 0.5% in reality, and now have forced everybody else to raise it, if they continue to say they're not going to raise taxes, they're just going to keep taking it from us, forcing our local citizens to do without their services or pay more. Tax base, how's this work? Let's skip that one as well. Okay, here's how these taxes work. You start with our rate. And this is what the mayor was talking about earlier. City of Farmington has the second lowest JRT, 2.66. Hadn't raised taxes since 1998. We were just 2.43 And had the state not sliced 11% away, we wouldn't have had to raise it that 2/8. But look where we are still. Albuquerque's still the only comparable city that's even close to us. This is what the city of Farmington charges right here. You should never think of the city of Farmington's tax rate as the 7.6. You should never think of it that way. We have nothing to do with that. We only control this box right here. The only one. So we have 2.6 at the bottom. Look where we compare. Bloomfield's 2.9, almost 3, and they're looking at a tax referendum. Durango's is 3, Aztec over 3. And on up it goes all the way up to 4.2 in Ruidoso. Now stacked then on top of our jurisdiction is San Juan County. They stack on top. San Juan County taxes us at a little over 1%. And they tax Aztec and Bloomfield and Kirtland as well on top of them. They have a whole tax base for them. So 1% for them is worth what 2.5% is worth to us, because they get to tax all of us. So if you notice that, they're in the middle of the range here, 1.2, but you can go down here to Lee County. This is another reason why I hate my friend in Hobbs. His county only taxes on top of them 0.25%. Ours is over 1. Then the state, with the biggest tax base of all, right? They collect tax everywhere in the state, in every jurisdiction. They then stack 3.9 on top of that. That's where you get our total. Everybody's equal here at 3.9. So when you put them all together, and you can't see these numbers, we're still pretty good at 7.6, but still lower than the region, considerably. So we can help make the low tax rate is a very positive thing. We want to keep our taxes as low as we can, but not, in my opinion, not to the extent of losing our services. So just remember 2.6. That's it. It's the only one your mayor and city council control. There's nothing they can do about this. There's absolutely nothing they can do about this. And in fact, the state, they actually can come over here and swipe some of this. That's what they just did to solve their problems. So but you know what? Remember I told you that Albuquerque was the only city that had lower GRT than us? Our property taxes, though, are half of what theirs are. So what that means is those numbers, if you making some assumptions of how much money you spend in a $200,000 home, you're going to save $1,200 in property tax living in Farmington versus Albuquerque. When you combine those two, admittedly with some assumptions, we now become the lowest tax city in the state of New Mexico with some of the best services. That's something that we're proud of. But it's important that our citizens recognize that. So what's that boil down to? So here's that 7.6%. For every dollar collected of GRT, the city of Farmington gets 2.66 or 35 cents. So every dollar you pay in GRT, just remember every service that you enjoy, police, fire, library, parks, recs, streets, everything, 35 cents is all that's coming to the city of Farmington. County gets 14, state gets 51. This is very, very important, and I need you to understand this and help remind people of that. All right, next slide. You say, how can we have such a low tax rate and somebody else have such a high one? It's because the state is authorized. We have another 1.25% of taxing authority it's been granted to us by the state, which is another $23 million. So in theory, City Council could impose another 1.25%, and they've had this for years and have never imposed it. Haven't put anything in since 1998. That's serious restraint. But remember when the tax base was doing that, right? You don't need to raise the rate because the tax base is going up. It's generating the new revenue in order to sustain the cost, the inflation changes and the new services that people want. So that's just an idea of what's out there, okay? Property tax, just to drive home the point. We only get 35 cents of every dollar that you spend in GRT. We only get 6 cents of every dollar that you spend in property tax. 6 cents. So when people say, I pay my property taxes, you should build a police station in front of my house, you really aren't generating it. We are supported by GRT, paid by 350,000 people. So every dollar you spend in property tax, look where it goes. 43% to Farmington Municipal Schools, 43 cents, 28 cents to San Juan County, 6 cents to the state of New Mexico, 17 cents to San Juan College. And this is what they depend on. The same way we depend heavily on GRT, the educational institutes really heavily depend on property tax. Property tax primarily funds education. GRT primarily funds local services. But because of that, we're not very diversified, right? All of our eggs are in one basket. Okay, almost done. Last two slides, just to remind you, not only are our taxes the lowest in the region, lowest in the state, our electric utility rates the same way. We remain 26% cheaper than Aztec Electric Utility, 42% cheaper than our friends in Durango are paying, and on down. So our electricity continues to be reliable and a great value. Water rates, please. Water rates the same way. We're near the bottom. Albuquerque's the only one less. It's really not comparable apples to apples with a $1 billion budget versus our $270 million budget. So the way that works in those numbers, Farmington's rates are, we are 35% or 28% below the state average. Water rates, 28% below the state average. We're 35% below Durango. We are 23% less than Bloomfield, and we are 10% less than Aztec. So our water rates down here, Aztec, Bloomfield, state average is here, and then on up the ladder. Santa Fe, we are a third of Santa Fe. So last slide, and we're done. I just want to acknowledge the team of people that are watching your pennies and are financing. We receive yearly 3 distinguished budgeting awards. The financial reporting award, we've received it for 21 years in a row. Only 5% of the cities and counties in the nation can have that honor, only 5%, and there's only 15 in our entire state. Distinguished Budgeting Award, only 1.5% of cities and counties in the entire nation receive that, only 8 in our state. This is relatively new. This is the popular financial report. In fact, there's copies of it in the back. It's designed to be kind of a easy, quick, layman's financial report with a lot of transparency. Only less than 1% of the nation have it, and only 2 in our state. And right now, we're only 1 or 2 cities in the whole state that have all 3 awards. So your finances are in good hands. I want to recognize Andy Mason, our Finance and Administrative Services Director, and our Budget Officer, Teresa Emmerich, for all the work that she does in helping keep us all straight. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Ron. So as you can tell, we didn't go into a lot of detail, numerical detail on this budget. I wanted to give you a broad overview of the different factors that are considered in developing a $272 million budget. Again, focusing primarily on that general fund that provides the source of revenue that funds most of the services and programs.
And I forgot one important thing. On our website, there's an appendix to this presentation that goes into that detail. So it looks like this. It's broken down by every department and division in the city. It tells you what they do. It gives you some of the vital statistics of the customers they serve, and it gives you how much we spend on those divisions and how much money, in some cases, those divisions might generate. So you can actually see the tax subsidy. Right. So I encourage you to go on the line and get more detail, or you can call us and we'll talk to you about any of these.
So we wanted to open it up to comments and questions. Again, comments are good. If you have something in particular that you're concerned about and you have a question, that's good as well. I think we can answer the questions with the resources that we have here this evening. You may have a question about a particular program that is offered. You know, a lot of people wonder about the Red Apple Transit system, for example, and they want to know how much the city subsidizes that program. Other people have other concerns about the programs that are offered. I can tell you that city government, county government, is all about providing services and programs that are desired and demanded by their citizens. Inherently, they are heavily subsidized. We have very few programs that carry their own weight. We have several enterprise funds, and they should carry their own weight. But those that are in the general fund, we expect to subsidize those services. They are quality of life kinds of programs and services that make Farmington an attractive place to be. So we're going to open it up here. Don't hesitate to ask a question. And I don't know that you need to come to the microphone. Maybe, Shana, maybe you could carry that around and maybe hand it to people who might have questions. So raise your hand. Charles, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Take the microphone if you would.
What's the unemployment rate right now in the city?
Something, I think. What is it? 7.9. And I was going to add, oh, go ahead.
Okay. How do you attribute the increase in spending in the marketplace, hamburgers and clothes and that sort of thing, with the decline in employment?
Well, the first thing I'd say is from our standpoint, we're going to spend less next year than we did. The private sector, investors all over this nation are still seeing this area as a place worth risking their capital on a short and long-term basis. They don't see this community as dying. They see it as growing and developing, and then we're in a downturn. So all I can ask, I can't get in the minds of a developer who says, I'm going to come spend, $10 million to build a sporting goods store, but they see, the best I can answer is those first slides I showed you, that it's more than just Farmington. I was going to add one comment to your statement about, subsidies. If something we did could make money, then the private sector would do it, right? And they should, right? We wouldn't want to compete with the private sector. So police departments don't make money, they cost money. Streets don't make money, they cost money. Parks don't make money, free parks, they cost money. If you could make money by being in the park business, the private sector would develop a park and charge admission.
Charles, I think it is counterintuitive to think that with a higher unemployment rate that people would be spending more money. It doesn't make sense, but I think unemployment rates can be spun in the way any kind of statistic could be spun. And one of the examples of that, I think, is that I've been hearing that the unemployment rate in North Dakota is much lower than it is in New Mexico, and they're heavily reliant on the oil and gas industry. They've had a huge boom there in the oil shale industry, but they've been affected by the drop in the commodity price of oil, just like every other oil-producing area in the country has been. What they're finding is that they had a transitory population working in the oil and gas industry there, and that when those drops have fallen off, those folks are leaving North Dakota. They're no longer in the workforce. They're not being counted in the unemployment ranks any longer, so their unemployment rate's not being impacted. New Mexico has exported a lot of workers into places like North Dakota. And so once folks lost their job, they're coming back to the states from which they came in the first place. And in one theory that is contributing to our little bit higher unemployment rate is that we've got a lot of unemployed people who have lost their jobs in other parts of the country and are coming back home now. So, like I say, you can put whatever spin you want on that. And the MSA area, that factors into it as well. We don't know exactly what the city of Farmington's unemployment rate is. We do have MSA statistics, though.
Well, some of these oil and gas companies are sending their employees, or my son-in-law, for instance, to Pennsylvania. Okay, that takes the income out of San Juan County. Pennsylvania gets that income.
Yeah, we've had, between 2008 and 2010, I think we had a job loss in San Juan County of 5,000 jobs. And they were mostly attributable to the oil and gas sector. And it's difficult to recover those jobs when they're lost. So as we have a decline in the oil and gas industry, people with resources, that's manpower, equipment, they're sending those resources where there's work to be done. Now, once things recover, it's hard to bring back that infrastructure, those people, those items of equipment. It will happen if pricing is sustained for a period of time, but it is difficult in the short term to bring all those things back to our community. That's the reason why it's so important for us to continue to pursue this diversity in our economy. And again, I've said it many times when I've talked to people, the numbers indicate that we're more diversified than we ever gave ourselves credit for, because we are being sustained in an environment of a dramatic decrease in the oil and gas industry in that activity. We're being sustained by something else. Certainly we're hurting, but we're not hurting as badly as we would be if we didn't have this diversity in our community. Other comments or questions? Does anybody have a specific question about a program or service that we offer? A concern about offering something that we shouldn't be offering? Maybe you think we ought to offer something that we aren't currently offering. Yes, sir.
You had mentioned, it's my understanding that you had discussed about building the water park, but it's also brought my attention that you're closing down Brookside Pool. Is that a replacement or is that an addition?
Yeah, the council in strategic planning is looking at what the options are and when they might be for replacing Brookside. Brookside is 60 years old and has finally died a death that it's just not worth spending any more money on. So one way or another, it has to close. There's been a lot of sentiment and a lot of feelings from the public that a community like ours that values recreation and parks and should have an outdoor water program of some type, what it might look like. And there's a movement within the communities around the country that instead of just building flat pools, if you're going to build it, things are more popular are these water parks, slides, kind of playgrounds in the water, lazy rivers, things like that are true attractions and places people of all ages can go and enjoy, as opposed to just sitting in a flat pool floating around. Yeah, I think the council's interested in looking at some different options that could be considered to replace Brookside Pool. One would be to simply replace it with something very much similar to that. That would be on the low end of the cost spectrum. Something else maybe in the mid-range on the cost spectrum, and that cost spectrum that we're talking about, probably anywhere from $1 million to $5 million. $1 million may get you that true replacement for that old facility. It's just new. $5 million could get you a water-themed park. And I was surprised yesterday in our strategic planning session that when we were shown some examples of these parks that have been built in other communities, ranging in different sizes of population, that every one of them had a pricing mechanism to them, an admission type mechanism that generated a net profit. And that's encouraging. Now, you're not ever going to break even. You're not ever going to recover the capital costs of building the facility. But just in terms of ongoing operations, these things can be done in a way that generates a net bottom line, while at the same time offering something additional to that quality of life that will tend to bring people in to our community who will spend money in our community. So that's the theory of it.
Does the aquatic center sustain its operating costs?
No, not even.
It's heavily subsidized.
Heavily subsidized, but it's not the same as this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Melissa?
I don't know that. I'm not going to word this probably correctly, but the hold harmless and the money that we're having to give to the state to make up for the decision. Is there a point where we're going to exceed in what we're giving back the amount of money that really they were trying to get? I mean, because it looks like it just goes on and on and on.
Yes. We looked at different options when we were contemplating whether we would increase the taxes under the authority that was given to us by the state when they legislated to roll back our hold harmless payments. The analysis indicated that with a 1/8 tax increment over the 15-year phase-out period, we would generate about $34.5 million over that same 15-year period, we would lose a cumulative $45 million of revenue that we'd historically received as a part of the hold harmless payment. So with a 1/8 increment, at the end of 15 years, we're in the hole about $10.5 million. So that forced us to think about getting ahead of the curve rather than staying behind the curve, and then we began to consider the second 1/8. And if we look at that number, I think that generates for us over the 15-year rollback period revenue of about it'd be twice, so about $69 million, losing the cumulative $45 million. But we get ahead for a while. Ultimately, though, the cumulative impact of the phasing out will exceed that $69 million. And that's where Rob talked about the third 1/8. We've been given 3 1/8 of authority. We've implemented 2/8 of that 3/8. That's where Rob talks about ultimately we will have to implement the final 1/8 just to protect ourselves from being in the net hole. And that's over a longer period of time. But frankly, I won't be here then, but and a lot of you won't be here then, but we plan for the long range, and we're going to have to do that kind of planning. Any other comments or questions? We still have, I have given us until 7:30 anyway.
Are we at all trying to bring a larger carrier into the airport? Right now it's kind of when we're flying our business, we don't even really try to fly out of here because it's not reliable enough.
Yeah.
And so Durango picks up all of our businesses. We're basically giving that away right at the moment.
I'm going to give you the citizen elected official reaction. Rob has been very engaged in dealing with air service issues in his entire tenure at the city of Farmington. We have a very tenuous hold on Great Lakes aviation. They have discontinued service to in excess of 20 communities that they have historically served, and that goes back as far as 3 years ago. Even 3 years ago, they had discontinued service to 23 plus communities, small communities that rely on regional air service. About a year and a half ago, I think it was August of 2013, was it, or 2014? August, Mike Lewis is here. Mike's the expert. So Mike, if I misstate, you can step in and correct me. But in August of 2013, the FAA enacted and implemented a regulation that changed the requirement for first officer hours from 250 hours to 1,500 hours, a 6 times increase in the requirement for first officer hours. And so that, as you can imagine, that put a big strain on the pilot pool. Bigger airlines were recruiting away pilots that were flying for smaller regional air service providers. Great Lakes was not immune from that kind of a reaction. Great Lakes has tried to counter that rule by fitting into an exemption for aircraft that carry nine passengers. They have 19 seaters. So in order to get by that requirement on pilot hours, they took out 10 seats in the airplane, so they only fly with 9 now. And that, as you can imagine, that would have a tremendous impact on the fiscal picture for them. They are currently, I think they have an application on file or petition on file with the Federal Aviation Administration seeking a waiver or an exemption from the rule, asking for the authority to resume flying 19-seat planes again. I don't think they're optimistic about the outcome of that, Mike.
They haven't heard back yet either.
And we haven't heard yet, but the city of Farmington has been engaged in trying to be an advocate for Great Lakes. We've been with them all the way. Mr. Mays and I have been to DC to advocate on behalf of Great Lakes, encouraging our legislative delegation and other key players on the federal level to embrace the idea that small communities are going to lose air service if these regulations remain in place. And so we're advocating aggressively for relief for Great Lakes and other small service providers. We've seen a drastic reduction in number of emplanements at our airport. And that's relevant to our community because there's federal funding attached to the number of emplanements at a local airport or at any airport. You have to have a minimum of 10,000 emplanements per year in order to qualify for airport improvement program funding. For us, that's a little over $1 million a year. We haven't met that number for 2 years, but we've been fortunate that we've been able to obtain a waiver to that requirement, and we're still receiving our full funding. Now that's in jeopardy for 2016, the current year, but we think, we know that the Senate has passed legislation that would protect communities like Farmington for 2016 and 2017. And, but that still has to go to the House. We're not as certain about what the House will do. We are in danger of losing that amount of airport improvement money. Mike, how much would we qualify for?
150,000.
150. So if we don't continue to have that waiver granted to us, then we're going to be down from $1 million a year to $150,000 a year for airport, needed airport improvements. Now, I'm talking about commercial air service. We've got a very viable general aviation airport. We have John Arrington here, who's on our Airport Advisory Commission, and John can attest to these things as well. So we've got a very viable general aviation airport. And we think even if we lost commercial service, we would have a viable airport. And we're looking at a helicopter pilot training program being brought in to Farmington. It'd be a training program in coordination with San Juan College. It would bring some revenue into the airport and to the community. So there's some positive things on the horizon, but a lot of people say, a lot of people are concerned and wonder, is there an opportunity to do something big in the way of airport construction? We've looked at the options of extending our runway to accommodate larger jets, larger passenger jets. That's very costly. We've actually looked at building a new airport, and we haven't looked at it seriously because that's probably a $300 million, $400 million project. The FAA isn't funding new airports, particularly in towns the size of Farmington, and the state's not funding them. And so if there's a group of people in Farmington, New Mexico who want to fund a $300, $400 million airport with local resources, we can talk about it, but it's not likely to happen. Plus, we've got other providers regionally. La Plata County is probably the de facto regional air service provider in this Four Corners region. Many of us take advantage of that. Many of us take advantage of the relative proximity of Albuquerque. And so we have options. I always tell people I'm open to ideas about what we can do to preserve commercial air service here. But the bottom line is that if we want to preserve it, the first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to subsidize fares. And I believe that is short-term at best. Short-term at best. If we want to subsidize fares in perpetuity, we might be able to keep somebody like Great Lakes Aviation or a new provider. But I don't sense that in what I hear from our citizens that people are wanting to subsidize fares for these providers. We tried it once back 8-10 years ago. Couldn't even get anybody to take advantage of it, as a matter of fact. But we had some grant money from the federal government that we offered as rate subsidies for a year and a half, I think, or maybe 2 years. They couldn't give the money away. Rob,
well,
do you have
the only
anything
thing
else
I'd
to
add,
add?
specific to your question, what are we doing? The mayor touched on some of our obstacles. First of all, air services is a private sector issue unless, as the mayor said, you want to subsidize it, and we don't. And the federal government's not offering any new subsidies right now. So, but Mike's very active. We do seek to recruit airlines to market ourselves to them. One of the challenges is there's only a handful of airlines in the entire country that actually have aircraft that can fly into Farmington because our runway is too short. So we're not apples to apples with Durango. Their runway is longer. So there's a very few airlines that we could even recruit, and the airlines that do have aircraft don't have pilots, as the mayor just pointed out. So we have some challenges at our airport that
Is there room to expand the runway?
not without going, it's a multi-million-dollar project of going over Pinion Hills Boulevard. We've actually had it conceptually looked at, and it's tens of millions. I mean,
I think it was $70 million to do that.
But just building the runway, though, it's not build it, they will come, because there's still no airlines that currently have pilots, so it's a vicious cycle. And by the way, Durango is beginning to be affected. That size airport now is really starting to feel the hurts of the pilot shortage. They're starting to have cancellations. If you've flown there much, you've noticed that. I've actually met with their airport manager. They're very concerned that we hit us first, that size airport's next, and unfortunately, the next place this hits is medium-sized markets like Albuquerque. It's going to be a crisis before it gets fixed. The federal government's really blown it on this one, and it's been slow to show up, so no one's really talking about it yet, but it's starting to raise its ugly head.
We have 5 minutes. Any other comments or questions? Since we have 5 minutes and I'm not seeing any other hands, I'm going to ask a question. What do folks think about animal shelter? It's something that's in the news right now. It has a budgetary impact for us, and just very basically, historically, the animal shelter was built about 3 years ago. We received $2.7 million from the state legislature to do that. The county kicked in $600,000, I believe, and the city about $800,000, and then private sector another $600,000. We wound up with a $4.2 million facility. The idea was to transition from strictly an animal control type of philosophy to one of animal welfare. We've hired a full-time vet. We have a low-cost, no-cost spay-neuter program. We're seeing great results. Live release rates have risen dramatically. For dogs and cats combined, it's up in near the 80% level. Before this transition, it was down below 50%. So we've accomplished much of what we wanted to accomplish. We're now confronted with a situation where the county's got an option to send their animals, county animals, to Aztec. And the county animal configuration, not configuration, but the demographic is about 45% of the animals that come into our Farmington shelter. And they have been paying us a contractual fee to take their animals. For the past 2 years, we've given them about a 20% subsidy? Probably about a 20% subsidy, with the understanding that this year we would expect them to pay fully for their pro rata share of those costs. They've got an option to go with Aztec at a lower cost. We're thinking that that's very possible that they will do that. If that happens, we will theoretically have 3,000 fewer animals to process in our animal shelter. But there will not be a proportionate reduction in operating costs. There should be some reduction in operating costs associated with that. But if the county isn't contributing to the operation of the facility, our costs are going to go up. I'm just interested in what people think about the way in which we fund animal services. I think that, one thing I hear is that we shouldn't be spending this amount of money on animals. We should be spending those dollars on humans. I find that a little bit of an illogical comment, and I don't mean to offend anybody if you have that sentiment. But really, are we providing those services for those animals, or are we providing those services for the people in our community? I would argue that we're providing those services for the people in our community, and not for the animals. It's only in the eyes of human beings that we see the plight of animals. And so when we provide this $1 million a year, we're truly providing for human wants and human needs. Anybody want to weigh in on that and give us some guidance? Well, it gave me an opportunity to talk about it. Melissa.
I'll throw out one thing. I mean, the actual budget subsidy of our animal shelter this year is scheduled to only be $620,000. That's actually $200,000 less than we subsidize a swimming pool by.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not some crazy amount of money that we're just out of proportion, have lost all sense of how we spend our money, humans versus animals.
I think the point of that discussion is just really to illustrate that we have a very diverse community. The citizens of our community make up all the social classes, economic abilities classes. We have people who have interests, diversity, and we just have a number of competing interests. And we've gone into a community where we provide bus service. We provide transportation, have been for the last 12 years. We've evolved in our animal services delivery of services. We have many competing interests, and it is truly a challenge for staff and the elected officials to balance what sometimes can be competing interests, particularly in a fiscal environment that we find ourselves. We think we've done it pretty well. We haven't cut services or programs in the last 8 or 9 years during this period of economic decline. Some might argue that we should, but we've been able to preserve that full range of services, programs that mean something to some group of people in our community, and we think our community is better for it. Melissa, you had...
It was just more commentary than, actual advice or thought, but I have pets from both the Farmington and the animal asset shelters that I've adopted. And I think anytime you have a community that will come up with $600,000 to invest into something, that speaks volumes about what the public wants. And those $600,000 did not come from the city of Farmington, they came from the greater San Juan County. So I would really hope that the county would take that into consideration when they make that decision. The Aztec shelter is not that large. I can't imagine them trying to filter 3,000 more animals through that location. So, again, it's more anecdotal than anything, but I do think there's a lot of people that believe very passionately in what that center does.
Well, if the county makes a decision to go with Aztec, I'm going to be intent on finding every one of those 3,000 county animals and getting them over to Aztec. All right, I don't see any other hands raised, so I want to thank you all for coming out. We think this is productive from our perspective. We hope that those of you who are here who are not associated with the city have learned something new. If you didn't learn something new, at least you had your memories refreshed. Thanks for being here.